why a session.
This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you for whoever did start the recording. You may be asking yourselves why a session on registered apprenticeship. And I would argue that everyone likes talking about apprenticeship, but relatively few people understand it as a system. So for example, I have talked to many individuals, usually relatives or friends or the children of friends, who believe they're taking apprenticeships simply because they're essentially working as a helper on a construction project or something like that. There's no formal training and these other things. And so our purpose here is to help establish an understanding of what registered apprenticeship is and what it will be going into the 21st century. As a small matter, and I put this in my comment, you will find a paper called Registered Apprenticeship in Construction, Built to Last, ? Which is an overview of the structure of registered apprenticeship, some data on the extent of it, and things of that nature. So that's up in Box, and I've given you a URL for that. You should be able to download it. But what we'll be doing today, we have 4 speakers. I'm feeling generous. You each get 12 minutes. I don't really have a way of enforcing it, but I'll assume that we're all polite and so on. And so this is an opportunity. Please put forward your PowerPoint or discussion and so on, and 12 minutes. And then we'll have a little time at the end of this for questions or discussion. So why don't we start with John Ladd?
Great. Thanks, Dale. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to try to share my screen here and multitask. As introduction, again, my name is John Ladd. I'm the administrator here in the Office of Apprenticeship, and here, hopefully that.
Very good.
Can folks see my slides?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, I'll try to go into presentation mode here. Well, thanks again, and really appreciate this opportunity to be with you all today and be part of this great panel. Again, I'm John Ladd. I'm the administrator here in the Office of Apprenticeship at the Department of Labor, and I guess I'm in the leadoff position here. So I'll kind of set the table a little bit, provide some context and background, as it sounds like some of the folks that are with us today may not be fully familiar with apprenticeship and what is registered apprenticeship specifically, and then talk a little bit about where we're going and some of the issues that we're facing in the apprenticeship system, and then I'm sure we'll have a lot of great discussion about this as well. So I've kind of broken this up into kind of 2 sections. Again, kind of where are we now and where are we going? So just to make sure everyone is, we do some level setting and everyone's on the same page. Just a quick primer here on registered apprenticeship. Apprenticeship in general is part of this broad continuum of work-based learning, right? There's lots of forms of work-based learning. There's on-the-job training, there's internships, there's a whole range of work-based learning, but registered apprenticeship is really on one end of the spectrum. It's the most structured, the most rigorous, and really we call it the gold standard of work-based learning. And you see these 5 key elements, and these are really elements of any apprenticeship program, but particularly a registered apprenticeship, and there are specific requirements for each. An important distinguishing factor for registered apprenticeship is that apprenticeship's a job, right? Individuals are being paid. It's not an unpaid internship. It's not some other form of volunteering, right? It is a job. Apprentices are providing productive work. They're being compensated, and their wages increase as their skills increase. So that's an important piece. There's also on-the-job learning, and by that we don't mean throw you on the job, figure it out, right? There's a structured plan of work, right? There's a work process schedule. There's things that you're expected to learn at different points in your career. So it's a very structured plan for on-the-job learning. Apprenticeship is also an earn and learn model. So you're combining what you learn on the job with the theory in the classroom. So there's very specific classroom requirements. So it's about an 80-20 split in terms of on the job versus classroom learning, but classroom learning is an important component of any apprenticeship program. There's supervision, there's mentorship. We think that's an important part of the quality aspects of apprenticeship, that there's direct supervision from a journey worker or someone who's fully proficient in their field. So you're learning from folks that know what they're doing and have been on the job. And again, this is part of like the intergenerational aspect of apprenticeship that's always existed, that we're passing down skills and knowledge from one generation to the next. And ultimately, apprenticeships lead to a credential. By the end of an apprenticeship, by successfully completing an apprenticeship, you are being determined by your employer, by your sponsor, that you're fully proficient in that occupation. You are a journey worker. You're able to carry on in that field and do the work independently. So that industry recognized credential, which can be issued by DOL at a minimum, but industry can also issue their own credentials as part of that program. But there's always a credential that allows that apprentice to walk away from that job, move to other jobs, and have that portable credential that goes with them. So those are some key components of registered apprenticeship, and really, in our opinion, any quality apprenticeship program. But of course, there's a lot of legal and regulatory frameworks behind what I just laid out. The National Apprenticeship Act was authorized in 1937, and interestingly has not been reauthorized since, though Congress is looking at that right now, and the House passed a really ambitious version of a reauthorized National Apprenticeship Act, and we're waiting to see if the Senate takes that up. And that would be a big development in the apprenticeship world if that act is reauthorized. But we also have two core sets of regulations that govern registered apprenticeship. There's 29 CFR 29, which is really about the standards of apprenticeship, what qualifies as apprenticeship, what's the governance system like. And so you see some of those bullets there, and I'm going to be brief here just in the interest of time. But then there's a whole other regulatory framework around EEO. And this is an important thing that we'll talk about more later. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is really built into the core of apprenticeship through these regulations. There are core expectations for anti-harassment, non-discrimination, and ultimately affirmative action for larger employers, and once programs have been in existence for at least a year or two. But there's an expectation of non-discrimination in every apprenticeship program, and there's stronger expectations for affirmative steps that all sponsors can take to make sure that they're diversifying their programs and making sure that these amazing opportunities are open and available to everyone. For folks that don't know, we have a bit of a bifurcated system. It's not your true kind of federal system, right, where the feds give out the money and make the regulations, and then the states and locals implement. It is that way in about half the states. So half of the states have what we call a state apprenticeship agency, and they've been recognized by the Department of Labor to register and oversee programs in their states. But the other half of the states don't have that structure. And so my office, the Office of Apprenticeship, directly administers apprenticeship and oversees apprenticeship in those states. So you see those in the dark states. There are those states where we have federal staff working in those states to help provide technical assistance, to register those programs, provide compliance, and do all the direct services that a state apprenticeship agency would do otherwise. Of course, we'll talk a lot about construction today, but we want to make sure folks know that there is registered apprenticeship programs across a broad range of industries. These are some of the industries that we have up here. Obviously, construction is the heart and soul of the apprenticeship system, and over half of the apprentices today come from the construction industry. But we do have growing footholds and efforts in each of these other industries. We just had a big apprenticeship trucking challenge a few months ago, where we signed up over 100 employers in 90 days to either start or join an existing apprenticeship program. We have healthcare, we have industry intermediaries that work in this space. So, this has been an important effort for us to try to diversify apprenticeship. And so, we have our foundation in the construction and to some extent manufacturing industries, but really looking to expand to these new industries as well. We've also been very fortunate in the past few years that Congress has appropriated funding to support registered apprenticeship. People may be surprised to learn that there really was no federal funding for to support apprenticeship activities across the country before FY16, 2016. That was the first time we had federally appropriated funding to support apprenticeship. And since then, we've got over, or by next year, we will have over $1 billion in active apprenticeship investments going across the country in a broad range of different grants and contracts and different areas of focus. We have grants that focus on states. We have grants that focus on youth apprenticeship. We have, as I said, apprenticeship intermediaries. We've got technical assistance centers that we've stood up. So there's a whole range of investments that we've been able to make beginning in 2016. And just we've been really fortunate to see this federal funding grow each year since Congress first appropriated those funds. And I guess, why are we getting this attention and why is there so much interest in apprenticeship these days is because we have a growing body of evidence that apprenticeship works. It's the gold standard of workforce development, that it's a win-win-win really for all the parties that are involved in apprenticeship. And by that, I mean, obviously the apprentice themselves. We have a ton of data now. The earnings for apprentices far exceed almost any other workforce development effort that we have. We have a long-term study that showed that apprentices will earn over $300,000 more over the course of their lifetime than their peers. So apprentices benefit, but employers benefit. We know the ROI, we've got increasing evidence and more evidence coming out this summer that for every dollar invested by an employer, they're going to get about $1.40, $1.47 back. So these programs aren't inexpensive. They're big investments by industry, but in terms of the returns, in terms of productivity, reduced turnover, there's clear ROI for industries and employers that invest in apprenticeship. And of course, the government, the public benefits, right? We've got research that shows for every dollar we invest, we get $28 back, right? So that's increased tax revenues, less public benefits that apprentices are earning. So again, win-win-win for everyone. And so I think that is a big part of what's driving folks and Congress's and the administration's interest in supporting registered apprenticeship. So where are we going? And hopefully keep an eye on time here. I'm trying to be quick here as well, but this is kind of a stylized chart of a little bit of the history of registered apprenticeship dating back to the early 1900s. We saw, Wisconsin really be the first in the nation to start to regulate apprenticeship. We had the National Apprenticeship Act in 1937. We had probably a high growth period in the 40s and 50s, a little bit of decline in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And then these blue bars really start to show kind of, where we've been the last 20 years or so. And coming out of the Great Recession and really the beginning of that focus on apprenticeship and the investment back in 2016 is where you really start to see a dramatic increase in the number of people participating in apprenticeship. And these yellow bars are some of the administration goals for expanding apprenticeship. So you can see we're being asked to support this major expansion of apprenticeship beyond really anything that we've seen in the past.
John,
yeah,
I'm going to step in because your time is now up.
I'm up. Okay.
Yes. And I'll leave it to the end. People can ask questions. So you can put questions in the chat and so on. But thank you very much. This was terrific.
Apologies for going long.
Oh, not a problem. Our next speaker will be Todd Stafford, who's the Executive Director of the Electrical Alliance, which is a joint labor management program between the IBEW, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and National Electrical Contractors Association. And it is a very impressive program in terms of what it does in training, how it's structured, and so on. They used to have an annual conference over University of Michigan for their trainers, but rather than tell you about it, I'll let Todd do that.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you very much. As you were saying, describing, I am Todd Stafford, Executive Director of the Electrical Training Alliance, and reinforce the word Dale's speaking about here. We are a jointly sponsored program between labor and management that collectively work together through the collective bargaining environment to generate apprenticeship programs. And not only are we jointly sponsored, is multi-employer jointly sponsored, which definitely brings into benefits, which I'll describe about our program and how it works. The best thing about apprenticeship, and I being a product of apprenticeship, is allowing the learning of the skills of trades through a combined parts of classroom-related training as well as on-the-job learning. And jointly sponsored plans, multi-employer plans, allows transfer between employers, et cetera, training, job site locations, accessibility to all skilled trades need to learn for any particular task. And huge challenges for us, because you see our industry, look at our numbers, the years for 2021, about 56,700 applications issued for our industry, as compared to the previous year with the pandemic harder running, but yet it's a pretty significant number, and we see that. We often hear the discussions that we're the best kept secret. Yes, I get that, and we are. But yet there's a lot of word out there as well. I mean, the word, as Mr. Ladd was speaking about, is growing about exposure to apprenticeship, and our numbers do see an increase in time, which is good for us to see the growing industry as well. And as we continue to add numbers, continue to do so. And the applications, these are applications for our inside apprenticeship program, we refer to it, which is the one of four. We manage 4 different programs: the outside line transmission workers you see working outside in the transmission industry, and those working within building constructions, industrial facilities, as well as telecommunications and residential. This is our numbers for our inside program, which is the largest, but there's significant numbers, the other 3 combined as well. But it's a good bellwether to determine the health of our apprenticeship programs overall. We look at our inside model, and this is a 900 hours related classroom instruction program, 8,000 hours on the job learning program, so significant classroom time as well as OJT time involved. And every minute, I can say that with all honesty, every minute is spent learning, studying, determining the learning needs of every particular task we do in our industry. And that's what it's about. Those hours are well used and significant as it goes through. But you see our numbers indentured over the past few years, as well as there's increased in 2019, as well as 2021, and the numbers continue to grow for us, and it helps. It helps us see grow. We see that positive slope in the line and grow from the recovery from 2014, which is carryover from recession time, the number of apprentices in the indentured industry, and it takes time to build back up. And that slope we continue to see the positive growth, which is good, which the work outlook and forecast makes so need that much greater. We do keep up with the number of applicants in our interview and who we interview. All the applicants that were put out there, not everyone qualifies an interview. Not everyone reaches the interview table, or their qualification processes, such as minimum requirement of C in algebra in secondary education or high school systems, or completion of other required documentation to reach the interview table. And we do keep up with our backgrounds of where we're getting our applicants from. And our applicants here we interview, of course, 29% minority males, with our abbreviation there for minority female, non-minority females as well, broken out for us. And we keep up with those numbers, and I look at those from a national average and determine how we can build programs and better assist local facilities, of which we have 300 plus in this country, actively interviewing, selecting, and putting work assignments to apprentices to go out. And the curriculum needs, of course, got to be supplied to each one of those applicants we look at and push up, but keeping up with the numbers is very critical to us, and who we interview, making sure we're not disadvantaged of affecting any populations adversely in ways we don't want to touch and don't want to do. And these numbers help us show that, because interviewing numbers and interviewed and selected, you see the numbers are pretty comparable, which means we've got a very active research body recruiting, got an active research body doing interview sets, and I'm pretty proud of the numbers that we're able to look at and see here comparisons that we don't have processes in a way to prevent or create barriers for someone in our apprenticeship. It's strictly now by an application process. It's pretty open, in our national standards with Mr. Ladd, working with his office as well as state apprenticeship agencies around the country approving, guarantees us a right. Now we have that transferability in our program between all 50 states. Where it looks, and the same model we deliver in one state can be the same model in the secondary state. And conversely, as apprentices travel, they do change temporary work assignments, different locations, training models, which is the true power of the collective bargaining agreement we have, allowing that transfer of apprentices between locations. And pretty considerable number. We look at just this year for the one model of one of four programs, the first year model of 9,000 being taken in is pretty exciting to see the growth. But you also extend the magnitude. We talk about curriculum development we do and how we provide that curriculum to up to 56,000 apprentices annually, as well as our journey level workers at continuing education as well, same courses. So total active numbers you see has dropped in the last couple of years due to pandemic related issues. Dramatic drop off in 2020 as we would expect it from pandemic related, but overall slope, we will see the increase pick back up. The preliminary numbers of 22 survey data being gathered even now as we speak is looking more attractive every day. And we look at our registration numbers, who's coming in apprenticeship, who's thinking about moving along and continue to be part. So it's pretty exciting to see. Active females is one number we look at as well. You just see the overall number of our overall apprentices drop out. We see our active female numbers is also dropping, but believe it or not, that slope is not as great as the decline as what we see in our overall drop, which is encouraging. Even though we have less to choose from, taking less, we're taking a great proportion of females in the industry. And I like seeing those kind of trends in the industry work out as well. Pretty exciting to see. How do we take care of the training? Because part of the training is, Mr. Lau was speaking about, as well as our on-the-job related training, but a significant portion of that related technical instruction in the classroom, 900 hours. Some of that is computer-generated materials that we deliver, but every classroom instructor is also delivered with a training model, a training instructor that's be their journeyman in the classroom, if we speak of it that way. And he spoke briefly about our National Training Institute we offer every year, the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, which comes the last couple of days of July, first week of August, which we prepare all individuals. We have several groups involved in that training and several people going to attend, probably 2,500 roughly attendance this year in the industry, because we have to prepare the related technical instruction models without apprentices to actually learn in the classroom. Journey level workers, they're experts, they're masters in their techniques and their technical instruction, what they do on the job sites. But our inside, how do we take care of that training model? So we've broken up our National Training Institute different groups. From physical education, our instructor training, which we encourage every instructor that's going to teach in our classroom model go through this NTI. That actually teaches them how to be an effective instructor in the classroom and take the skills they've learned over the years to how to deliver in the classroom. We have committee groups telling our committees how to properly operate, how to operate by your standards, create policies, procedures, and guidelines within the industry. And our outside committee for the transmission industry. We do like to reward our outstanding apprentices, those who completed the model. I like bringing those back because they will be leaders within your industry. I want to reward them for it, bring them back to our NTI as well, and let them see what we do as an industry, get them more actively involved earlier as soon as they finish, as well as other various groups getting involved in the industry. So you see pretty diverse group that we have and bringing in, but it's very actively attended and monitored as well. Spoke briefly about the committee group, and what we're doing in the committees is actually the committees that run those jointly sponsored programs, of which is 300 plus around the country, and the jointly monitored committees that participate. And we cover those topics for them so they can see exactly what they need to be concerned about when they get back home, and exactly what they should be concerned about, because the committees are responsible as sponsors for running the program. On the day-to-day operations, maybe with the training director, but the committees are the ones going to take care of it. So we try to actively maintain some committee level training for our members, particularly in the outside industry. Yes, sir.
You have 3 minutes.
3 minutes, sir, and I'll finish up very quickly. Thank you.
Okay.
Topics covered for our outside committee group is finishing up the different things affecting one particular industry, which is always effectively exposing new opportunities, new growth materials to our training instructors, as well as our instructors and committee members in the outside industry. OA group, I spoke about a little bit briefly about our program, what we look about, how to get involved. We introduced in this group the foremanship training already, leadership development, how to run projects, personal financial issues, as well as mentoring. Mentoring is one of the huge programs in my mind I think we need to talk and discuss in our industry as far as what we're trying to prepare our industry when it comes to mentoring support, whether it's on the job site or not outside. And data shows, internal data we're trying to build and show that we create a mentoring program for apprentices where we have a minority male, African-American male working with a first-year apprentice that's just completed our program. So make sure they have somebody to call, somebody to lean on, somebody to reach, and keep our retention numbers actively high and increasing rather than decreasing throughout their apprenticeship model, which is our goal. So Dale, very quickly, I can talk for 4 hours and you know that, but I'm gonna stop here now and I'll answer questions you need, sir, and sit back and watch.
what can I say? On time and under budget.
There we go.
Our next speaker will be David Bullock. We're fortunate to have him because he was an important participant in a study done by NAB2, which focused on issues of underrepresented groups within construction. And so it's a great study. I think it's finished, and it's just a matter of getting it through some various reviews and out the door. But I'll let David and perhaps Tom talk about that. David, the floor is yours. You have 11 minutes.
Thank you, Dale, and it's my pleasure to be here. My name is David Bullock, and I am currently affiliated with the University of Michigan, but formerly was working in the labor studies, comparative labor studies program at Morehouse College. As Dale has mentioned, I was a part of a research team that included Dr. Roland Zullo of the University of Michigan. That was a part of a larger NAB2 study. Our part of the study was to look at diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in the construction trades, with particular emphasis on the non-union side. And so we offer an exploratory response. It was not a quantitative project, it was a qualitative project. A perspective on the policies and practices of non-union employers who have a reputation for being leaders in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the construction and energy utility sectors. And so I'll kind of get to some, areas of further research and questions that that come out of our research. But we were able to ultimately only interview 8 firms, and then an additional firm gave us 1 written response. We used a snowball sampling approach to garner a sufficient number of qualified participants, and so ended up contacting about 93 firms in total, right? So contacting 93, only able to interview 8, with 1 additional firm coming in at the last minute with a written response. And so there are some questions about kind of what maybe that low response rate might mean. A number of the non-union firms were concerned about legal issues. I think they also were potentially concerned about how their programs were being perceived or could be perceived. And so there was some reticence and hesitancy on the behalf of firms to participate in our surveys. But we were able to, of the firms that we contacted and interviewed, we contacted firms that were affiliated with the Associated Builders and Contractors and the Associated General Contractors as well. And we discovered that there were individuals identified as leaders in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, and also there was a culture of care website that identified firms and individuals that seemed to be, at least internally in these associations, to be identified as leaders with respect to recruitment, retention, and training. Minorities and others, women, and others that might be put under the rubric of the diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda. But these are some of the key conclusions. One, I think, important conclusion of our research is that the concept of diversity was very, very broadly interpreted by non-union employers. Usually, when considering groups protected by employment discrimination law, that's kind of a more narrow way of thinking about diversity, or when thinking about, say, race. But a lot of these firms saw diversity to include veterans. Diversity might include immigrants. So they had a larger, more broadly construed idea of diversity, and that's one point. The second point is that there really wasn't a sense of a specific kind of program, right? And so we termed the mentoring or the recruitment strategy or the retention strategy of these non-union firms, not as programs, but more so as efforts, right? Because they were very diverse, and the character of these efforts really depended upon the size, the geographic location, and more importantly, the particular passion, say, of the CEO of the corporations. And so there weren't really diversity programs, as it were, but there were efforts. Another key takeaway from our research is that recruiting female applicants was seen as particularly challenging. And so some respondents used creative means to motivate interested candidates by providing scholarships to local community colleges, by providing internships. And a lot of the recruitment efforts were used to match individuals with specific with a specific skill for a specific job. And so the folks who were a part of these efforts weren't necessarily given a number of different skills, but they were trained in one skill for a particular job, and that would kind of define the effort as well. Lastly, in closing, the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts of these non-union firms also seem to be tied to an ideology of this is the right thing to do, as opposed to, say, some economic motivations, right? And so these efforts by these firms weren't really indexed to worker productivity, questions about firm productivity, but really, as we begin to talk to folks about their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, they had more of a moralistic motivation. This is the right thing to do. We're members of our community. We want to show that we care about the city or the community or the geographic location that we're located in. And so we found that was interesting as well. I'll close with this. This didn't necessarily directly come out of a specific answer in the surveys that we were utilizing in this research, but it was suggested that there may be a connection between, say, diversity and an economic model that suggests that, hey, you know, if an African-American male has a felon, or you know, if a female has a green card, I mean, that the kind of people that were being recruited, retained, trained, and hired were folks that didn't really do well in terms of wages in the labor market generally. And so they would be individuals that would typically do jobs for lower wages and for lower benefits. And so that is something else that further research and study needs to be done around how these particular DE&I models fit a larger economic model when it comes to worker employment. And that's it. I'm done.
Thank you, David. You're definitely very interesting, very on time. Both of those are great. So we'll now turn to our sweep out presenter, Tom Kriger. He is the Research and Education Director for NABTU, which is an National Association of Building Trades Unions. I always get confused. I just use NABTU, but terrifically knowledgeable, very active in promoting apprenticeship readiness programs, which are an important part of providing a diverse workforce, skilled workforce for signatory construction. Tom, you have the clock has started.
All right. Thank you, Dale. I appreciate it. And thank you, Lyra, for giving us this opportunity to talk about apprenticeship. You can tell that, everybody who's spoken here this morning is very committed to it. I'll start with an observation, then I'm going to talk about the 20th century and then the 21st century and apprenticeship. The observation is, John Ladd talked about the National Apprenticeship Act and the pieces of registered apprenticeship. Apprenticeship is an exchange relationship. The workers come into that system in all crafts and all industries, and the exchange or the relationship is they agree to work for a couple of years at lower wages, at progressive wages, knowing that they will progress through a wage schedule, which when they journey out gets them up to the full-time wage of experienced workers. And in exchange for giving up some of that pay over the years, whether it's 3 to 5 years in the construction industry, is they get trained in every aspect of their industry. And that's where, that's what Todd Stafford, I was very glad he could join us this morning. It's one of the great examples of NAB2 training. It's at the University of Michigan, the highest standards in training. So, to look back, I know this panel is called Registered Apprenticeship in the 21st Century. It's probably good to talk about what we did in the 20th century. And that is all about quality. One of the reasons that the building trades is still more than half of the registered apprenticeship system. A few years ago, we were about 2/3 or even 3/4 of the registered apprenticeship system. We're very glad that the Department of Labor and 3 administrations have been working to expand apprenticeship. But we focus on that issue of quality. That's what's really made why the building trades has this great investment and all that, which I'll talk about, is that the goal is to produce the best trained workers in the world, and all of our unions do that, and that's why the building trades have been around. That's why we have a huge investment in this system of all private money. And just a couple of numbers today, we have, including, and Todd said he has over 300 training centers, and think about that just in the IBEW. All of the trades together have 1,625 that are represented by NAB2, North America's building trades unions. That's just in the United States. We have another 300 in Canada. We have 20,000 certified instructors that take part in the program, like Todd talked about at the University of Michigan, the National Training Institute of the IBEW. We have a number of 3 or 4 of our crafts go to Ann Arbor and work either with Washtenaw Community College or the University of Michigan to train instructors, because it's important that the teachers have the highest quality standards to teach apprentices in this system. $2 billion private investment, all of the building trades unions. It's one of the largest privately funded education systems in the United States. And the highest skill and safety standards, because what John Ladd talked about in the National Apprenticeship Act was really designed in the late 30s to protect with one goal in mind, and that was to protect the interests of apprentices in all industries. So, that's what we were kind of rested on. That's what the building trades built their reputation on, was skill and quality in that system. And as I said, you see that in the IBEW program. That's true of all of our programs across the building trades. What's different today, though? Because this panel is about registered apprenticeship in the 21st century. So what is different in the 21st century? And I would say that in terms of quality, we will add, and this is something that Todd and John talked about, is diversity. And David, of course, that was the purpose of the study, which will be coming out soon, is diversity, is that we have added that criteria now to our apprenticeship programs. We're using apprenticeship readiness. We don't use the term pre-apprenticeship, because for a variety of technical reasons, but what we call apprenticeship readiness programs, which we've developed really over the last 10 or 15 years. And we have one of the largest, I think it's the largest pre-apprenticeship training program or apprenticeship readiness in any industry in the United States. Just over the last 5 years, we've had 11,000 people successfully complete a turnkey curriculum that we've developed. It's called the multi-craft core curriculum. It doesn't prepare people for a particular trade. The important part about the MC3, as we call it, is it prepares people for all of the trades. And it talks to young people about construction, and particularly about the joint labor management sector that Todd talked about, where you have the highest quality training, the highest wages, the highest benefits, the highest safety and skill standards in the construction industry, really in the world, we think. So, and of those 11,000 graduates, we run every year. Last year, we had 3,500 people graduate. Of those 11,000 people who've successfully completed this curriculum, between 75 and 80% every year for the last 5 years have been people of color, and between 20 and 25% of those completers every year for the last 5 years have been women. So we're developing this program as a funnel, as a pipeline, whatever you want to call it, into that apprenticeship system, so that the next generation of workers, because they're going to pay for the next generation of workers, that $2 billion private investment is through collective bargaining. We think that's also part of our secret sauce in the construction industry, where our programs have been around and so high quality for so long. But we want to bring in a new generation, because it's the current generation of workers. We think that's also unique about construction, are paying for the education for the next generation of workers. There's no cost to the students for either our apprenticeship readiness programs or our apprenticeship programs. It's a great opportunity for young people. They may not hear about it. That's why we've added the pre-apprenticeship or apprenticeship readiness as a way to get into the schools, as a way to get into adult programs to recruit adults where we have demand for apprentices. And what we've added over the last 4 or 5 years is for the justice involved. We have a lot of programs. We teach the MC3 in San Quentin. We teach it in Folsom Prison in California. We teach it at High Desert State Prison in Nevada. We teach it at McDougall Walker. It's the largest corrections institution in New England. And we're constantly adding new corrections institutions, jails, prisons, and things, and many programs working with the formerly incarcerated every day, because we in the building trades understand completely, it's not always been our history, but we understand completely that talent is equally distributed in our society, but opportunities have not. So that's one of the big sea changes, I think, in the apprenticeship system in the 21st century, is that in addition to quality, we have put diversity, equity, and inclusion as some of our primary goals in the trades. So just to finish, where does that leave us today? The infrastructure bill, and John had those yellow bars on his chart. I assume that many of those will be infrastructure jobs in the construction industry. It's fantastic. The Biden administration has been really, really deeply committed, much more so than any administration we have seen, to the idea of expanding apprenticeship, particularly through procurement. A lot of this infrastructure spend will go through the various federal agencies, and it will have labor standards, apprenticeship utilization, prevailing wage, project labor agreements, and all those things that are designed to build the middle class as we rebuild the United States. So just to summarize, again, we built our reputation in the building trades on private investment and quality. In the 21st century, and I got to give you a shout out to the Office of Apprenticeship and John Ladd and the Department of Labor for marshaling all of those federal resources, which we have taken advantage of. It's given us about a third of the contract. We have the industry intermediary contract in construction. About a third of that fund goes directly to seed money to start new apprenticeship readiness programs. And we do a huge part of that money goes for train the trainer courses for our curriculum, for school districts who would not be able to afford it to send people to training. Otherwise, it wasn't fit in within the school budget. So that funding from the Department of Labor has been essential in us to reach our diversity, equity, inclusion, and our quality goals in construction. One last story. I was on a panel, very fortunate in my job because I get to go around the country, see a lot of apprenticeship programs like the Todd Stafford did and pre-apprenticeship opportunities. I was on a panel in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago, and they had two folks that came out of a program in LA called the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. These two gentlemen, between the two of them, had been in prison for 40 years. 40 years. One guy had been incarcerated for 23 years. He had completed his apprenticeship. He was now a full journeyman laborer. The other guy had been in prison for 17 years. He was going through the apprenticeship readiness program, and now through his apprenticeship with the laborers. They were both working full-time at Hire LAX, the rebuild project at the LA airport, and they interviewed them. They both talked, and this was their shot in life. They could not have had, been more appraised effusively their opportunities in the apprenticeship system to go through pre-apprenticeship, and it's changed their lives. And we see this every day. These programs and the opportunities we have in construction change people's lives. We want to bring more of them in. We share that view with the IBEW. We share that view with the Department of Labor, and appreciate Lyra for giving us opportunities to talk about it today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm going to throw out one or two quick comments and then open the floor to questions. After this, there's a lunch break. So for people, if we run long, people can leave when they want. And I think probably most people will stick around. So in thinking back on this panel, a couple things to come away with is, one, a majority of the money going into the registered apprenticeship system is private money. This is supported by employers and employees. And this is, so this contrasts with other government training programs where, one, the employers typically are not financially involved. It's being funded by government agencies. In registered apprenticeship, the government agencies provide oversight. The Office of Apprenticeship approves programs, approves curricula, monitors the finances of those programs. I hear complaints about that on occasion, but not surprising. One second. And, but nonetheless, that's the role, the basic role of the Office of Apprenticeship. It has become more involved in things like helping to fund apprenticeship readiness programs, but there's not very much federal money that goes back into the apprenticeship system except as oversight or this sort of apprenticeship readiness, I think. Two, apprenticeship programs compare favorably with other efforts by governments to train workers because there's a mismatch potentially. We will train, a government program will train workers potentially for jobs that don't currently exist or that are not in great demand. Apprenticeship guarantees a relationship between the apprentice and an employer or a set of employers. And so what that means is the transition from training to work is fairly straightforward. In fact, it's virtually automatic in apprenticeship programs as I know them. And that makes a very large difference to the success of these programs. It isn't just that they, earn while you learn, it's that there's a job there, there's a job there, or you're going into a job pool for a set of, say, construction employers that are signatory. And so that really makes apprenticeship a particularly important program and produces the sort of figures that John Ladd cited, where apprenticeship has a return on the dollar invested of about 150%. That's pretty wild in terms of rates of return. So all these things are good. There are lots of ways we can probably expand apprenticeship, but I think it's important to realize it is in the end a private system, and therefore one has to be careful what purposes one burdens it with. That I've seen terrific progress in the apprenticeship system in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's still, but in talking with people, it still clearly faces issues with, say, bringing women in. They're more of a challenge. And this is going to be a challenge which will be dealt with. I was urged by apprenticeship coordinators at one point I was speaking with who simply said, we're currently running 2 to 3%. If we have a goal of 7% behind us, we can basically get people to buy off on that. So that maybe will be our next 10-year goal for this. It's a big it's a big step. I think some of the trades are making big progress. And from what Tom has told us, the apprenticeship readiness programs are certainly doing that. I will turn the rest over to the participants to ask each other questions, so on and so forth.
Dale, you might look at the chat room and some of the comments and questions that have been presented there to prime the pump.
Okay, let's see. Well, John Ladd has provided some, suggests that you'll find many useful resources at www.apprenticeship.gov and a lot of tools, which seems to me to be good. Let me drop down a bit further and see. Let's see.
You've got a hand, Dale.
I do, but I can't see a hand.
It's my hand is up. If I
Please go ahead.
Thanks. I'm Ariane Hegewisch from the Institute for Women's Policy Research, and good to see. I know a lot of you, so great to see this panel. Recently, last week, 2 weeks ago, the EOC had a hearing on discrimination in the construction trades. And what was interesting is that there were a lot of hostile questions from some of the commissioners, including hostile answers from the AGC representatives about the role of project labor agreements and of local hire in terms of promoting diversity and inclusion. And from what I know, the evidence of project labor agreements that actually make conscious efforts to include diversity or improve diversity, not just by themselves, but where their access and opportunity committees, they're doing quite well, much better than others. So I'm just wondering, this is maybe both to Tom and to John Ladd, whether there are active training efforts to ensure that people know how to include this in relation to apprentice diversity as the infrastructure bill and is rolled out and more PLAs are expected, or how we can use that method to improve diversity and inclusion.
I can actually say something about that briefly, which is that there have been a number of West Coast PLAs that have been used specifically to increase diversity on PLA projects, and especially the Los Angeles has a series of public PLAs. There have been a series of port PLAs, and these have, some of them have pretty elaborate systems to assure that the local hire also produces diversity. And an example of this is, you cannot write a PLA that says we will, hire such a percent of African Americans, such a percent of Hispanics, or such a percent of women. But what you can do is use zip codes, and that's been used pretty effectively to focus the hiring, at least in terms of racial and ethnic diversity. I'm less familiar with what's done with women. And it seemed like you were hinting that, yes, you could write a PLA that has specific guidelines for women. I'm unfamiliar with that.
And Tom could probably address this a lot better than I can, but just want to make sure that folks are aware that President Biden did sign an executive order on the use of PLAs. And that's something that all federal agencies that are involved in rolling out infrastructure funding are, really trying to get smart and educate themselves on in terms of best practices. And Dale, like you said, looking at places where they have been effective and what are those factors of success. So we're really looking at all of these levers to really think about how do we use this opportunity that exists right now with infrastructure funding and what will likely be a growth and expansion of apprenticeship programs in the construction industry, and how do we drive DEIA during this moment. So I'll turn it over to Tom, who is probably much better expert at this than I am.
I mean, we're very familiar with that. I mean, just to give the sort of put some flesh on the bones of what Dale talked about, the higher LAX, the metro, the light rail project in LA. We have another project labor agreement with the school district, LAUSD. And those have specific local hire provisions there, which we support. And it's been great to see the Biden administration follow through on the agency funding, which typically goes through under the infrastructure bill, is going to go through formula funding or grants to include labor standards in there, like project labor, because you now get points if you have project labor agreements on those grant applications, which is great. I mean, and just real quick, in LA, they have, I think it's 40-20-10 requirements. It's 40% of the workforce has to come from within LA County, 20% of the apprentices have to come with certain zip codes within LA County, and 10% of the workforce has to be from what are called disadvantaged workers. And that's Gulf War veterans, Iraq War veterans, foster care system, drug abuse, homeless people, and all of that. And to the testament to the trades, we're identifying those people, and that's where apprenticeship readiness comes in to help recruit them, but putting them to work on those projects. And the outcomes are very good. So that's why we're very optimistic that a lot of the infrastructure work will be done with those local hire. And then it also points you to a private sector, the stadium, the Viking Stadium. They had like 9% women on that project because we can do it. I mean, it can be done. And that's just an agreement between the building trades, the granting authority, or whoever's funding the project, the end users. There has to be monitoring, there has to be clearly articulated goals for local hire and that. And these things can be done. We can put more women to work in the industry.
Other questions? Other people would like, let's see. John Ladd's indicating it's a hard stop at 1:15, so he's about to run out, but I'll just keep this open so we can go ahead. Since there aren't questions, let me explain a little bit more about my comment. I'm very happy to hear that PLAs are being used not only to promote disadvantaged groups by race and ethnicity, but also by gender, which I look on as a more difficult issue. One moment. And in essence, what it comes down to is, let's just say, I think we know there's occupational segregation in the United States. And some of that is because of past discrimination, the development of occupational cultures, and so on and so forth. But it's also there because you've got, there are different tendencies, socially trained tendencies in different genders and so on towards certain, if you will, jobs. And so one of the things I did to try to get a hold of this for a labor management committee I was working for was go over to Department of Education data on enrollment in trade programs, such as, essentially construction trade programs, plumbing, pipe fitting, and so on. And so what happened from what came out of that, and I thought, community colleges, they're all under the Department of Education. They're very strict on non-discrimination. In other words, if we're going to get some feel for differences between genders in terms of participation in construction-oriented training programs, it would probably, our best base might be community colleges. What I found, at least for the plumbing and pipe trades, was there was very little difference between, there was very low enrollment of women in those particular trades. Now, it's likely to be very different, say, in electrical which has been more successful in bringing women in. But what I would say is that in coming up with guidelines, we need to be careful that we don't create excessive goals. We need to have some real reaches, but not goals that are going to encourage firms to simply, and labor management committees say, we can't meet those goals.
Can I push back a little bit? I do think realistic goals are really important. But if you look at the military, which probably is one of the most macho occupations that you can think of, it's like 14, and I think it was even higher a few years back, of recruits are women, particularly in the younger generations. So, you know, that to have fewer than 4% of apprentices in electrical trades be women is a little bit of a mismatch, maybe. And you can also, so I think maybe to go to 50% is not realistic, but to kind of question a little bit how much we can push to get, you know, to, and you can see also our survey, as I said, we had something like 600 apprentices, women apprentices in the trades. A lot of them were doing well, but a substantial, like around 25% were facing serious discrimination, particularly including in on-the-job training. And I think the community college comparison is interesting because they said typically on-the-job training, they felt treated more, less equally than in classroom training, right? I think in the experience we have made more progress, but I do think there's quite a bit of room to push before.
I think there's no, I'm in complete agreement with you. What I would say is two things. One, I try to get, the military does a lot of construction training, and however they do it in a way that I can't get hold of their data, because if they have a larger, as it were, pool of women, it might be fairly, that would perhaps be a good measure of the degree to which women will go into those trades, given they've already entered the military. But I haven't been able to get that. I've been told it doesn't exist. I guess the other thing is, you know, so absolutely, this can be pushed ahead. And I think what Tom was saying is that a large portion of the individuals going through apprenticeship readiness, what was it, 20-30% were women. So there's a lot of room. I think the iron workers have the Iron University, which looks like a very successful way to bring women in. So I think the NAB2 report will look at some of these issues. So we just need to pry it out of NAB2. What do you think, Tom? Any day now?
Yeah, we're just going through the last of the approval. I just wanted to make a couple of points. I mean, and I don't know if this has been, I think it's been announced, but I think the details are still coming. I mean, one of the big social barriers that and this was in the report that the IWPR did, is childcare. And we have a very large childcare initiative coming out with a focus on two cities, New York City and Milwaukee, because it's a huge issue for women. It's a huge issue for even for many men who have kids, you know, families who have kids, because the childcare centers don't open early enough, you know, to get kids in there before you go to work on your typical construction project. So that's one of the big things that NAB2 will be kicking out in the fall, and the announcement will come from that soon. That's a huge, you know, it takes enormous amount of funding to do it. We're working on pilot projects in those two cities, and it's to go to licensed providers and to, you know, in one set, I think it's Milwaukee's, to do project-based health childcare. So there is, you know, when you go to work on a big project that's going to last for a while, that you have a place for your kids, but also to go to existing childcare providers and give them supplemental funding to hire more people so they can open earlier and stay open later. And that's what, you know, to see if that will move the needle for us, and just, you know, have people, to particularly women, to be able to have a place for their kids to go. That's a huge barrier in our industry. And then I also want to just give, you know, that's one of the things we're doing. We also have the largest conference for women in construction in the world called Trades Women Build Nations. That's October 28th through the 30th. If any of you are interested, to type in there. That's, you know, the most energy that's one of the largest also of our building trades meetings that we have now is Trades Women Build Nations. That's in Las Vegas, October 28th to the 30th. And then we also work with the Sheryl Sandberg Foundation. And we have what are called lean-in circles for women, because they do face still issues. We have some knuckle draggers out there. You know, it's just strategies. How do you deal with that? And to, you know, kind of solidarity with other women to talk them through that. So we don't lose young people, you know, as they move up through the apprenticeship and into journey level status.
Thank you, Tom. Ariana, do you have some more comments? I think this is a good discussion, so let's pursue it for another moment or two.
I would just point to the NAP2 childcare initiative is really exciting, and I actually mentioned it in my comments to the EOC that this is upcoming. And if you are interested in the childcare and construction issue, Oregon for apprentices has been doing this they've supported childcare now for over 10 years there. And they've not just childcare, but, you know, it's part of a bunch of supports. And they've been really able to increase both racial and gender diversity through those supports. And the Boston, the carpenters trade, working with some community groups, have another smaller pilot on childcare and construction. And then there's a great training program which has Department of Labor supports in Biloxi, Mississippi, where childcare can follow pre-apprentices for up to a year so that they actually can move into jobs. And so, yeah, I think there are exciting things going on. Although I should say on our retention, and we always talk just about construction in the trade. So I guess people on this, we just know more about this on this panel, but retention is such a huge issue for apprentices. And what we found, among the mothers who work in construction, yes, childcare is a problem, but disrespect and discrimination were cited by more of them than childcare problems. So it's not just childcare that holds back women in the trade.
Let's see. Any questions that people have, comments? Let's see. On this, Bill.
But I think Tom Kriger and I a couple of years ago had a conversation about the outreach program for underrepresented groups at Oak Ridge, and the success that they had up until that point. I presume it's continuing. And they provided a lot of resources. They were facing a situation of, people aging out, and being in a rural area in East Tennessee, they did not have a large population handy, at least of traditional workers, to come in for these very well-paid jobs at Oak Ridge. And in fact, they have sort of talking about security. I had senior executives there tell me that they had guaranteed employment for generations in their future. And so that's better than most situations. And so they did outreach with their apprenticeship program, pre-apprenticeship program, I would call it, but I understand the issue with language, and had just tremendous positive results in bringing people in. And the day they finished the program, they stepped into a job. And a lot of these people were single mothers, and it provided them with a pathway to a well-paid, secure job with benefits and security had previously been over the horizon for them. Just they were never considered the possibility, and they've been very happy with the results. And so and I guess my point is that we have some examples around the United States that and people really learn more from less from data than from these narrative case studies of what has worked in different places. I think when we're mobilizing people for policy, often, I've certainly found this when I'm speaking to legislatures, when I put up a spreadsheet, or a chart or a graph, their eyes roll back. But if I start telling a story, it mobilizes them and captures their hearts. And so I would just toss that out there for consideration when we're promoting expansion of these. And we see a big growth of apprenticeship programs around the country into new areas. And, marketing it is a big part of it. So, and I have nothing but admiration for the privately funded programs, whether it's the Electrical Alliance or the laborers or the building trades in general. I mean, it's been an extraordinary and poorly understood contribution of the private sector alliance in American society to keeping this country. We seldom have buildings falling down like and I'm guessing that the one that fell down in Florida a couple of years ago wasn't built by union contractors. So, okay, that's I've said my piece at the end, since you invited me, Dale. Or invited anybody, I jumped in.
Yes, true. Again, I asked Ariana if she could briefly tell us about the meeting, the PLA meeting with the EEOC. I didn't quite understand what was going on, but I have some ideas.
Oh, so very quickly, I guess we all need to jump off. The EEOC held a hearing on the construction industry because they say the industry, some of the most egregious complaints they get are from construction. The way the hearings go, then the commissioners, each of them have witnesses, and there was the witness, Ken Simonson, whatever. He's the chief economist for the Association of General Contractors. Both his testimony and in questions was quite a bit around local hire agreements have less, it's just stating, leading to less diversity. PLAs are welcomed by some of their contractors, but a lot of them say they lead to cost overruns and worse report on PLA. So it just seems to be an industry kickback against PLA. But anyways, if you go to the EEOC website, both the written hearings and the discussion, it was remote, are all online. So it's easy to find. It was an interesting discussion.
Thank you very much. In this session, of course, we essentially have not covered open shop apprenticeship systems. Both the ABC and the AGC have some apprenticeship systems, along with the International Electrical Contractors, again, a non-signatory organization. So I think if you take a look, many of them are quite different. Again, I point you towards the paper, Registered Apprenticeship Construction, Built to Last, which is on the website, where there's some information on those. If we had another panel, I would probably invite a representative of the AGC to talk about open shop apprenticeships, but we have limited time, as you know. I think Lyra could perhaps do some training in fast talking. All of you passed that very well, and I appreciate that. So I'm going to stick around, and if people want to stick around, we can continue the discussion. If so, why don't you unmute and we can just have a more general discussion.
I'm jumping off. Thank you so much, everybody, for this panel, and Dale for organizing it. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Okay. Mark, good to see you, or not see you, as the case may be.